Elijah Garrett had not drawn a full breath in 11 days. The infection in his leg had returned for the third time since Spotsylvania, the old wound splitting open again in the dry Nebraska wind like a promise that could never be kept, and the blood that seeped through the bandages Clara had wrapped around his calf was dark and wrong. The kind of dark that told a man his body was giving up on him long before his mind was willing to admit it. They had found him that morning, slumped against the single wooden chair in his sod house, his face gray as creek mud, his breathing shallow and wet, and the fire in the hearth had burned down to nothing because he had not had the strength to feed it since the previous night. 6 months ago, his wife Agnes had lain in the same narrow cot where he now rested, her skin burning with cholera fever, and the West had shown her no mercy then, and it was showing him none now. And the fallen farmer, who had crawled out of the Virginia wilderness with a ruined leg and a dream of owning 160 acres of Nebraska prairie, was beginning to understand that the West did not care what dreams a man carried. It did not care what he had survived. It did not care what he had already lost. The West showed no mercy, and Elijah Garrett was a fallen farmer, and he had less than a week before the pain swallowed him whole and left nothing behind but another grave on land that did not yet legally belong to him. If stories about fallen men who refused to stay down, about the brutal price the West demanded from every soul who dared to call it home, and about a woman whose life was saved by seconds speak to something raw and real inside you, then subscribe now, because what Elijah Garrett did in those final days is the kind of story that will not leave you the same after you hear it. The homestead sat alone on a stretch of Nebraska plains that looked in the autumn of 1873 like the surface of the moon if the moon had ever known wind. The sod house was small, built by Elijah's own hands 3 years prior when he filed his claim under the Homestead Act, the law that promised every honest farmer the chance to own land if he could survive 5 years on it. He had 2 years left on that promise. 2 years, and the 160 acres would officially belong to him. But the panic of 1873 had hit the Nebraska homesteads like a plague that autumn. The great financial collapse rolling west from Philadelphia in September, banks folding and railroad companies crumbling overnight, and the farmers who had staked everything on fertile ground found themselves suddenly broke and desperate. Lawlessness was spreading faster than the crop blight, and the West showed no mercy to the ones who could not defend what was theirs. Elijah had been a corporal in the Union Army during the war. He fought at Spotsylvania Courthouse in May of 1864, and a Confederate bullet tore through the meat of his left leg just above the knee, shattering bone in a way that the surgeons told him could not be fully repaired. They saved the leg, but the scar tissue that formed was thick and ugly and prone to infection, a permanent reminder that the war had taken something from him no amount of farming could replace. He came west after the war because the East held nothing for him anymore. He filed his homestead claim in the spring of 1870, built the sod house with Agnes at his side, planted wheat and rye, and kept a small herd of cattle. And for a little while, it seemed like the life they had dreamed of might be possible. Then Agnes got sick with cholera. Then she was gone, and Elijah Garrett became a fallen farmer in every sense of the word, a man whose body was breaking down and whose heart had already broken, living alone on a claim he needed 2 more years to own, in a land that showed him no mercy at all. It was on a Tuesday in the first week of October that he found the woman. He had dragged himself out of the sod house that morning, despite the fever, because the wheat needed checking, and because stopping was a habit he had not allowed himself since Agnes died. The pain in his leg was a constant throb that flared into something sharper with every step, and the dry October wind carried the smell of dust and dead grass across the flats, and the sky was white and enormous and utterly indifferent. He saw her from maybe 40 yards out, a shape that did not belong among the wheat stalks, crumpled in the dirt, like a rag someone had dropped and forgotten. At first, he thought it was a dead animal. Then he saw the dress, dark blue, torn at the hem, and the hair that spilled across the ground like spilled ink, and he moved faster than his leg had allowed him to move in months. Her name was Clara Dunmore. She was 33 years old, and she had been walking for 4 days with nothing but a tin cup and a prayer. Her husband, Thomas, had been killed on the trail 2 weeks prior, shot down by a gang of raiders who hit their small merchant wagon on the road between Fort Kearny and Omaha. Clara had seen everything. She had seen Thomas drop. She had seen the men go through the wagon, taking what they wanted and destroying the rest. And she had seen their faces, every one of them, close enough to know them if she ever saw them again. The men knew this. They knew she was alive. They knew she was heading east, and they were looking for her, because a woman who could put faces to a murder was a woman who could end them, and the West showed no mercy to men who let loose ends dangle. Elijah carried her back to the sod house on his back, his bad legs screaming with every step, the woman weighing almost nothing against his frame. She was burning with dehydration and exposure, her skin papery and cracked, her lips split and bleeding. He laid her on the cot where Agnes had died and wrapped her in every blanket he owned and built up the fire and boiled water and fed her broth spoonful by spoonful through the rest of that day and into the night. He did not sleep. A fallen farmer with a broken body and a broken heart kept vigil over a woman he had never met, because something in him that the war and the grief and the West had not yet managed to kill was still there, still insisting that this was what a man did when he found someone dying. Clara woke the next morning with her eyes clear enough to speak. She told Elijah everything, and as she spoke, her voice was quiet and steady in the way that voices are when they have already passed through the worst fear and come out the other side. She told him about Thomas. She told him about the wagon. She told him about the 6 men who had done it, their faces burned into her memory like brands. She told him they had been following her since it happened, that she had felt them behind her on the trail, that she had pushed herself off the road and into the grass and walked through the night to avoid being seen, and that by the time she collapsed in his wheat field, she had been running on nothing for days. Elijah listened to all of it without saying a word. When she finished, he sat in the silence for a long time, staring at the dirt floor, and then he said very quietly that she was safe now. It was perhaps the most dangerous lie a man had ever told. They came on the 3rd day. Elijah saw them first, 6 riders on the horizon, coming from the south along the edge of the creek bed, their horses moving at a steady walk that said they were not in a hurry because they knew exactly where they were going. He watched them from the doorway of the sod house, the shotgun in his hands, the stock worn smooth by years of use, and he felt something settle in his chest that was not quite fear and not quite resolve, but something between the two, something cold and clear. He turned back inside and told Clara to stay in the back corner behind the grain sacks and not to move and not to make a sound. And she looked at him with eyes that had already seen one man die for her, and she nodded. The leader of the group was a man named Harlan Voigt. Elijah would learn his name later from Clara, who had heard one of the others call him by it on the trail. Voigt was tall and lean and had the kind of face that had once been handsome and had gone hard the way iron goes hard when it is hammered too many times. He had been a sergeant in the Union Army, like Elijah had been a corporal, and after the war, he had drifted west and found that the skills the Army had taught him translated very well into a life of raiding along the Nebraska trails. The panic of 1873 had made his work easier. Desperate men made willing accomplices, and the law was thin as paper on the plains that autumn, and the West showed no mercy to the weak, and Voigt had built a small empire on that single truth. He pulled his horse up 20 yards from the sod house and sat in the saddle without dismounting, and the other 5 men spread out behind him in a loose arc, their hands resting easy near their guns, and the wind moved across the flats, carrying the smell of horse sweat and leather. Voigt looked at Elijah for a long time. Then he spoke, and his voice carried easily in the flat Nebraska air. He said he knew the woman was inside. He said he wanted her brought out. He said he did not want any trouble, in a tone that suggested trouble was something he was very good at making, if it came to it. Elijah did not move from the doorway. The shotgun hung at his side, not raised, just there. He was a fallen farmer with a bad leg and a sod house and 2 more years on a homestead claim, and he was standing in front of 6 armed men, and everything in him that was practical was telling him to step aside. The woman was not his. Her fight was not his fight. He had a claim to finish proving. The West showed no mercy, and a dead man owned nothing. All of this was true, and Elijah Garrett looked at Harlan Voigt and said, "No, pause right here. I need you to think about this. A fallen farmer, alone, with a limp and a shotgun, and nothing in this world to prove except that he was still a man, says no to 6 killers on his doorstep. He could have let them take her. He could have saved himself, but he said no. What would you have done? Tell me in the comments, because the next few minutes are going to change everything, and I need to know if you understood why he chose the way he chose." Voigt stared at him for a moment, and something flickered across his face that might have been surprise or might have been amusement. And then he said, very calmly, that he was giving Elijah one chance to reconsider. He said it the way a man says it when he has already decided what happens next. Elijah said nothing. He did not look away. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight, and the wind blew, and somewhere behind the sod house, a fence board creaked, and then Voigt nodded to the man on his far left, and the man swung down from his horse and started walking toward the door. What happened next took less than 30 seconds. It took seconds, just seconds. And in those seconds, a fallen farmer did something that no one who heard the story afterward could fully explain, because it did not make sense on paper. A one-legged man against 6, and it should not have worked. And it almost did not, but it did. It worked by seconds. It worked because Elijah knew his land the way he knew his own heartbeat, and he knew the creek bed behind the sod house and the way the ground dropped off into a shallow gully that you could not see from horseback unless you already knew it was there. And he knew that the 6 men were spread out because they expected the fight to come from the front. And he knew something else too, something that the war had taught him, which was that men who are confident they are going to win are always slower to react than men who know they are about to lose everything. He stepped back into the sod house and slammed the door and threw the bolt, and in the same motion grabbed Clara by the arm and pulled her toward the back, where a gap in the sod wall opened onto the gully, a gap Agnes had wanted him to fill in, but that he had never gotten around to closing because time on the homestead was something you never had enough of. Clara went through the gap without a word, without a stumble, without the seconds of hesitation that might have cost them both their lives. Elijah followed her, and as he went, he brought the shotgun up and fired both barrels back through the gap, and the sound of it was enormous, and he did not wait to see what it hit because he was already moving, crawling down into the gully with his bad leg dragging behind him, and Clara was ahead of him, running low and fast toward the creek bed where the tall grass would swallow them both. The first man through the door found the sod house empty and the gap in the back wall and the smoke still hanging in the air, and he made a sound that was somewhere between a curse and a laugh, and he went through the gap after them. And that is when the second barrel of the shotgun that Elijah had somehow reloaded in the time it took the man to cross the room found him in the chest at a range of maybe 10 feet, and the man went down hard in the dirt of the gully and did not get back up. Voigt heard the shots and came around the side of the sod house on horseback and saw the gully and understood immediately what was happening, and he was smarter than the man who had gone through the door, and he sent 2 of his riders wide to flank the creek bed, while he and the remaining 2 came straight down the slope on foot, guns drawn, moving fast and careful the way soldiers move when they know the ground is against them. What followed was not a battle in any sense that the word is usually meant. It was a series of small, desperate, brutal encounters spread across maybe 200 yards of Nebraska prairie, and it lasted for minutes that felt like hours. And in those minutes, a fallen farmer who could barely walk held a woman's life in his hands and refused to let it go. Elijah shot one of the flankers as the man came over the lip of the creek bed, the rifle he had grabbed from inside the sod house, barking once and catching the man in the shoulder and spinning him around. Clara had found a rock, heavy and jagged, and she used it on the second flanker when he came crashing through the grass toward them, brought it down on the back of his skull with both hands, and all the strength that 4 days of starvation and fear and watching her husband die had compressed into a single act of survival. The man crumpled, 2 down, 4 left, counting the 1 in the gully. Voigt and his 2 remaining men were coming down the slope toward the creek, and Elijah could hear them, could hear their boots on the dry grass and the scrape of their weapons, and Voigt's voice, low and controlled, giving directions. And Elijah knew with the kind of certainty that comes to a man when he has run out of options and time and everything except the thing that made him get up every morning and check the wheat. He knew that he was not going to survive this. The leg was done. The blood loss from the wound had been steady for days, and the running and the crawling and the exertion of the last few minutes had opened it wide again, and he could feel the warmth of it spreading down his calf and into his boot, and the world was starting to go gray at the edges, in the way it goes gray when the body is shutting down. But Clara was alive. Clara was here, behind him, holding that rock, her face streaked with dirt and blood that was not hers, and she was alive, and he had seconds left, maybe less, and he was going to use every one of them. He put Clara behind the largest boulder at the edge of the creek and told her to stay down and not to move. and then he turned back toward the slope and raised the rifle and waited. The first of Voight's two companions came over the rise at a run, confident, not expecting resistance, and Elijah shot him through the sternum at 40 yards, and the man pitched forward and slid down the slope in the dry grass like a stone rolling downhill. The second man saw his companion fall and stopped and dropped to one knee and fired, and the bullet took Elijah in the chest, high and to the left, and he felt it the way you feel a door slam shut, a sudden finality, a closing. He did not fall, not yet. He steadied the rifle against his shoulder and fired once more, and the second man jerked and went still, and then there was only Voight. Voight came around the edge of the creek bed, slowly, pistol drawn, and he looked at Elijah standing there, with blood coming out of his chest and his leg, his face white as bone, and he looked at the woman behind the boulder, alive, her face streaked with dirt and blood that was not hers, and Voight understood that this was not going to end the way he had planned. He raised his pistol. Elijah raised the rifle. They were maybe 15 feet apart, and the wind was blowing, and the Nebraska sky was vast and silent above them. And in that moment, in those final seconds, a fallen farmer and a killer looked at each other across the short distance between life and death. Elijah fired first, by seconds, just seconds, and the bullet caught Voight in the throat, and he went down without a sound. And then the silence came, the kind of silence that only exists after violence has finished its work. And Elijah Garrett let the rifle fall and sat down because his legs would not hold him anymore. Clara found him there, slumped against the bank of the creek, the blood pooling beneath him in the dry dirt. She knelt beside him and put her hand on his chest and felt the heartbeat, faint and uneven, slowing the way a clock slows when someone forgets to wind it. He opened his eyes and looked at her, and there was something in his face that was not pain and was not fear, but something quieter, something like satisfaction, the look of a man who has done the one thing he was put on the earth to do and has done it completely. She asked him his name because she realized she had never asked, and he told her. She asked him if he was going to be all right, and they both knew the answer. And he did not say it, but he nodded once because he did not want to waste the seconds he had left on a lie. He died before the sun went down. Clara stayed with him until dark, and then she walked the rest of the way to the nearest settlement, a town called Broken Bow, 11 miles east along the creek, and she told them what had happened. And they sent men back to the homestead to bring in the bodies. One of those men was a clerk at the land office, and when he heard that Elijah Garrett had been a homesteader with 2 years left on his claim, he felt something shift in his chest that he could not name, because a man had to be alive to prove up his claim, and the West showed no mercy to the dead, not even to the ones who deserved it most. Clara Dunmore made it to Omaha 3 weeks later. She lived another 40 years. She never spoke publicly about what happened on the Nebraska plains in October of 1873, but the people who knew her said that she kept a small piece of Nebraska soil in a tin box on her mantle for the rest of her life, and that sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she would open the box and look at it, and her face would do something complicated and quiet that no one could quite read. Some things the West took from people could never be given back. Some things a woman carried in her bones long after the man who put them there had fallen. The panic of 1873 continued to ravage the homesteads through that winter and into the following year. Thousands of farmers abandoned their claims. Thousands more stayed and starved and kept plowing because the alternative was to admit that the dream was dead. And some of them made it through and some did not. And the West showed no mercy to either kind. The land did not remember the men who worked it. It did not remember the blood or the years of labor poured into its soil. It only kept growing, season after season, swallowing the stories of fallen farmers and women, saved by seconds, and men who said no when every voice told them to say yes. The West showed no mercy. That was the oldest truth on the plains, the one every homesteader learned sooner or later. But there are moments, rare and small and easily missed, when a man finds something in himself that is bigger than the West and its cruelty. Elijah Garrett found it on a Tuesday in October in a sod house on 160 acres he never got to own. And in the seconds it took him to say no, he became something the West could never take back. The West showed no mercy, but sometimes a fallen farmer showed everything he had, and sometimes that was enough. If this story stirred something in you, like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what you felt in those final seconds, because stories like this deserve to be heard, and there are more where this one came from.